Yesterday, we finally got new information about the one-time transfer rule proposed by the NCAA long ago, and we have got to talk about it because this will have major implications. But before we do, as always, y'all know the drill. I want to hear from y'all, so be sure to hop down to the comments and let me know what you're thinking. Who are you watching in the transfer portal? Where do you think they go, or where would you like to see them go? And if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification because I do constant college football content, and you don't want to miss any of it. And if you do enjoy that content, be sure to like and comment down below, because those interactions really do go a long ways in helping content creators like myself get picked up and maintained by the YouTube algorithm. But with all that being said and out the way, we have got to break this down because there's a lot to talk about. And first and foremost, there were a lot of questions after this was proposed, and effectively we got radio silence from the NCAA as to whether or not this would happen. And I have always been of the mindset that this was an inevitability. And the reason is because the NCAA effectively shackled themselves when they proposed this and then gave us radio silence. The reason is because they allowed college football as a whole to operate under the assumption that this was codified law at the time that they had announced it. So they had created a situation to which there was really no coming back from. And it's interesting because we have seen players in the transfer portal, and I have to wonder how many players have been waiting to make an announcement because they weren't 100% sure as to whether or not the NCAA was going to pass this because we had silence. But now that silence is broken, and we know that this will go into effect as far as all meetings are adjourned today. But that doesn't mean that there still aren't questions. And I myself have some. And I've heard multiple different things. So first and foremost, let's talk what I've heard. I've heard that this is a implication that it will go past the conference rulings and that the NCAA rule will supersede any conference rulings, effectively meaning that interconference transferring is a go and you can do it without sitting out a year. And that would be huge because a team like the Alabama Crimson Tide have been in the running for Henry To'oTo'o, and we assume that they are the favorite as long as this rule can be passed and that he can transfer without having to sit out a year. But the real honest truth there is that I have not read anything or seen anything that explicitly states that to be the case. I've talked to people in the know and I've gotten differing opinions. Some people think that this is going to end up happening, that the conferences are going to end up passing this, and that the NCAA rule far reaches that. And then I've heard other opinions from people that are very reliable saying that they aren't so sure that this supersedes conference rulings because apparently conference presidents will be meeting here soon to discuss how to go forward after this. Whether or not that's a discussion of how this rule will effectively change and shake up the workings of an interconference schedule, and whether or not they want to pass rules kind of setting up guidelines for how this will go, I don't know because we don't have that information yet, and all this information will be coming out throughout the week, and we will certainly be following it as it comes because this is going to have huge implications. But as I said, I've heard from kind of both sides of the aisle that they think that this could supersede any conference ruling, which would allow for a free reign blanket ruling by the NCAA. And to me, that makes sense that the NCAA would make a blanket ruling, but who knows at this point? It is going to be incredibly interesting to see. However, we have got to talk about some of the bigger implications and some of the bigger names because just today, Xavier Worthy, a prized possession of the Michigan recruiting class out of the last year's cycle, has announced that he is requesting his release from his NLI. And this is huge because this is a guy that the Alabama Crimson Tide were after, and though I don't know that he ends up going to the Alabama Crimson Tide receiving room is absolutely loaded, this rule being passed now gives him the freedom to be able to transfer anywhere he would like, assuming that he can transfer within the Big Ten and have that instant eligibility. That's information that we are going to be needing sooner rather than later from either the conferences or the NCAA, because that is a large difference in understanding. And look, everybody right now is kind of operating under the assumption that this will happen ultimately, that the conferences will ultimately get on board and pass these things. However, we don't know when. We saw the Big 12 get rid of their rule that would allow for a player to have to sit 1 year after an interconference transfer yesterday after the rule was announced. So we're kind of, it looks to me like these conferences are already getting on board, and that's kind of the understanding. However, like I did say, it is very important to note that even though I have heard from people such as Travis Rear in the Bama Online podcast that they have heard that there is an understanding from people on the inside that this NCAA rule supersedes the conference rules, I have heard from equally as credible people that come April 28th or some date like that, there is supposed to be meetings with the conference presidents and that they will be coming together to discuss what happens after. Now, whether or not that meeting is to set whether the conferences will now allow for this precedent, or whether or not that meeting is for the presidents to discuss how they are going to make the rules surrounding this rule going forward, I don't know. But a player such as Henry To'oTo'o is a name that has to instantly come up because we have talked about him a lot on this channel. And it's important to note that he had a visit scheduled to Ohio State for April 2nd or 3rd, I cannot remember which date exactly, but ultimately did not end up taking that visit. Now, whether it's because of this rule or not, I don't know, but based on my understanding, Ohio State feels confident that they will be getting him back on campus in May. The month of April, I don't know that he will be taking any visits. I have heard some from Ohio State people and from some credible sources that Ohio State thinks that they can get him on the campus at the end of this month for an unofficial visit, but at the same time, I've also heard that he will be trying to get to Ohio State in May. We talked about how if this rule is passed sooner rather than later, it could help the decision of Henry To'oTo'o, because we have heard from his father that his father at least has the utmost interest in Alabama. So even though we have heard from the father that they should have made the decision to go to Alabama last time, they called not going there a mistake, and that they would not make that mistake again, I think it is important to note that a place such as Ohio State also has a phenomenal track record of being able to develop linebacker talent and send them to the NFL. And so because of that, an offer such as Ohio State is very real, and a very real one to listen to, especially if this drags on to the conference level. If we find out, let's say tomorrow, that the NCAA comes out and says, okay, well, now that's the NCAA level, now it's up to the conferences to make their move after that. If the SEC drags their feet, it might not serve his purpose to wait. It's going to be incredibly interesting to see what happens, because right now we still have questions as to the extent that this rule will permeate. We don't know whether or not it supersedes the conference rulings, even though that is my understanding of it. That understanding could easily be flawed because it hasn't actually been expressly stated, but I'm not the only person to have that understanding. However, once again, I have people with incredible information that I trust fully that have also had a different understanding that they will have to meet at the president level of these conferences to sort out what happens next at the conference level. So hop down to the comments, let me know what you're thinking, because this right here is going to have massive implications. People are going to be able to move from teams, and it's also important to note before we close this out that the one-time transfer rule is a one-time in the sense of you can only do it once in your college career, as far as I'm aware, not that it can only happen this year. So this is going to have lasting implications for college football. It's going to change the way we recruit. So because of that, I cannot wait to hear what y'all are thinking. Do you think that this changes anything with Henry To'oTo'o? Be sure to let me know down below. That's it. See ya.